Chapter 373, Interlude 2. Showing a boyish grin, the Lord of Stories laughed. How am I likin' it? What a silly question, ya goof. It's been 13 millennia since someone found me to narrate their story. Of course I'm lovin' it. He tilted his head with the carefree curiosity of the little child he appeared to be. So why have ye stopped? Go on, Samael Theosbane. Don't keep me waitin'. Samael rubbed the rough bristles on his chin and felt the stubble of dark black hair on his face, now grown thick enough almost to be called a proper beard. It had been months since he had last shaved, and several more days since he had begun telling his story to this thoroughly bored god. So it was hardly surprising his beard had grown this unruly, almost like his father, albeit a lot less groomed. He dragged a hand slowly down his jaw and exhaled languidly. I stopped because I'm thirsty. Do you know how long it has been since I tasted a sip of water? Before he could even finish the complaint, Samael suddenly found his hands were gripping a large jug of chilled beer. He did not flinch an eye in surprise. Instead, he calmly glanced at it and said, "Actually, I prefer scotch over beer." "Oh, right," the Lord of Stories giggled, slapping his forehead lightly. "My bad." Samael didn't notice the exact moment when the beer jug in his grip changed into a glass of fine scotch. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. But without any complaint, he took a slow, appreciative sip of the amber liquor. "Ah, that's the stuff," he murmured with contentment. Then he looked back at the child with a satisfied grin of his own. "Also, I stopped because the first act is over." "First act," Samael nodded, lowering himself onto the parchment ground and settling into a cross-legged position. "Aha, the story of my life can be divided using a simple 4-act structure. The first act was the characters and setting introduction. That part is now done. The second act is the rising action. The story will reach its midpoint there and will have the biggest plot twist I ever experienced. Then there will be the third act, which is the climax." He gestured vaguely around them. "That's where we are right now." The Lord of Stories fell silent for a few seconds, deep in thought. Then, from somewhere around them, several pages floated up from the parchment landscape and drifted neatly into his small hand. He swiftly skimmed them over before scoffing. "Oh really? Climax? But I don't see any climax here in her story." Samael's grin turned so much more wicked than the polite smiles he had been wearing up until now. "That's because it hasn't happened yet." The boy just rolled his eyes. "Good heavens, are ye one of those narrators who promise fireworks but always hold back the spark? I hate her kind." Then he paused, clearly struck by a new thought, and leaned forward. "Wait a minute, if we're only in Act 3, what's in the fourth act?" Samael shrugged like the answer was as obvious as daylight. "What else? Resolution. In Act 4, I will have finished telling you my story. Then I'll get the means to defeat the Spirit King. And at last, I'll have my promised happy ending. I'll celebrate our victory with my friends, spend some quality time with my niece and nephew, mourn the companions who didn't live to see the day, and curse the people who betrayed us along the way. But in the end, I'll be happy. Because I'll be lying next to my wife." Wife. But, she's not wife." The golden-haired man froze. A moment later, his face flushed red with embarrassment. "Oh, damn it, yeah," he rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "I guess she and I are not officially married yet. Fine, I'll wife her up first thing after. The War of Heaven's path is over." The Lord of Stories stared at him. For a brief moment, there was something almost sad in the way the child looked at the man before him. Like the all-powerful god was pitying the insignificant mortal. But then the god snapped. "Ye are so delusional, Samael." He waved the pages held by his childishly tiny hands with furious intensity. "There is no happy endin' for ye to reach. I've got her whole life story written here line by line. Everything that has happened to you, is happenin' and will happen. Remember, even the conversation we're havin' right now. It's written here. Her story has already gone dark. And from here on out, it only moves toward tragedy. The Spirit King is supposed to win. He will win. That is the only ending permissible." The mortal man standing before the god could only smile in response. And while his golden eyes seemed so tired, in that moment, it was Samael who looked like the one pitying the great Lord of Stories, like the latter really was just a child and not some ancient deity. The god in question ignored that look entirely. Instead, he lifted the loose sheets of parchment in his small hands and waved them again, this time with far more theatrical emphasis. "And while we're on this topic, I've got several complaints about how you're tellin' this tale." Samael stopped and raised an eyebrow. "What, didn't you just say you're liking the story?" "The story, yes, Narration, not so much. The Archduke flatly stared at this supposedly omnipotent child for a few short moments before slowly taking another sip of his scotch. That's a bold critique coming from someone who's been giggling like a schoolgirl for the past several days when I was speaking. The Lord of Stories sniffed in offense. First of all, I have refined tastes, he declared, pressing a small hand over his heart. Second of all, I'm a professional. I can enjoy a tale and still criticize the way it's delivered. Samael lowered the glass. Professional. Of course. The child puffed his chest out, pointing broadly at the endless sea of parchment surrounding them. Do ye have any idea how many stories I've presided over? Entire civilizations have risen and fallen while I curated their narratives. I am practically the patron saint of storytelling. Ah, Samael nodded gravely. So you're a critic. The boy's eye twitched. Fine, fine. Samael relented, taking one more sip before politely backing down. Please continue with your complaints, Mr. Lord of Critics. I'm very curious now. The Lord of Stories narrowed his eyes further, then gazed down at the pages in his hand again. Well, for starters, he said, flipping one sheet with far more drama than the action required, ye ramble. Samael was flabbergasted to hear that. What, ramble, the child repeated matter-of-factly. Ye circle around a point for too long like an alcoholic pigeon before finally landin' on it. Quote. That is called proper build-up. That is called wastin' page space. Samael took slight offense at that. So you're the god of stories and you're complaining about pacing? Really? Yes, I am. And another thing, ye keep foreshadowin' things without resolvin' them quickly. Whole plan against Juliana was stretched out so long that I barely remembered half of it by the time the payoff came. That is how suspense works. That is how impatient readers start skippin' paragraphs. The child shot back. Oh, and sometimes ye don't foreshadow enough either. Like, her heart was on the right. Really, ye reveal this information right when she gets stabbed. That's one of the most stupidly used action cliches I've ever seen. Samael's patience was growing thin. The fuck, what do you mean, cliché? What would you have me do if she was literally born with her heart on the right? And I did foreshadow it. Not well enough, the god teased. Also, from a structural standpoint, ye could tighten her pacing by at least 12%. 12%, yes. Ye could edit out so much unnecessary material. For instance, no one wants to read about Ivan's love story. It didn't advance the plot in the slightest. Samael took another long sip of his scotch, glaring at the child over the rim of his glass. Anything else? Oh, plenty, the Lord of Stories said, flipping through several pages with visible enthusiasm, like someone who had been waiting a millennium to do exactly this. Adjectives repeat. Now Samael was truly stunned. What? Descriptors, the boy went on, tapping the page with an accusatory little finger. Ye keep us in the same ones over and over again. Ye should try expandin' vocabulary. Right now you're just rotatin' words like a lazy bard. And what's with all the unnecessary comedy? The entire Noctvale Wilds sequence had so much potential. Ye described some of those beasts in such gruesome detail. There was so much terror. It could have been a proper horror arc. But instead, ye ruined the mood with cringy lines of cheap humor. I've got actual story right here in my hands, and that forest was nowhere near as jolly and cheerful as ye made it sound. Samael leaned back slightly, studying the child with renewed irritation. It had taken him less effort to find his presumably non-existent name than it was taking him to restrain himself from punching this deity in the face. I feel like you're missing the point of my story. Oh, I understand the point perfectly, the god replied breezily. Existential suffering, cosmic betrayal, doomed heroism, a dash of romance. It's a very classic tragic structure. The mortal man shook his head, and his shoulders slumped slightly as if weary from carrying some unseen, unbearable weight for far too long. I won't lie, it was hard. It has been hard. I've witnessed many misfortunes in my life. I've lost people who meant the world to me. I've buried comrades who trusted me to lead them. I've watched cities burn while I stood there too late to stop it. I've heard the last words of people who believed I could save them, even when I knew I couldn't. For once, the Lord of Stories did not interrupt. He simply watched. His dark eyes remained hidden behind the thick curtain of his even darker hair. But that's not the point of my story, Samael said after a while. The point is that this is my life. I made an oath long ago to live it without regrets. And I had done well on that oath. When I look back now, the first things I remember are the moments I spent with my friends. Why are there so many jokes, you ask? Why do the grim moments get buried in cheap humor? Because that's how I remember those days. I just remember the stupid jokes, or the ridiculous arguments, or the pranks we played on each other. Of course, sometimes I also forget a lot of things. But you get my point. He glanced somewhere into the distance, as if looking back across years only he could see. Noctvale Wilds was a dangerous place. It was dark and brutal. We were just lost kids in a forest full of incomprehensible nightmares. But it's also where I found some of my best friends. And after that, I just kept making more. And I love every single one of those idiots. The child lowered his head a little. All at once, the atmosphere in the entire hall turned ominous. The sea of parchment papers beneath them seemed to rustle with an unseen wind, and the air grew in weight. When the boy lifted his face again, there was an expression of pure disgust twisting his childish features. You are insufferable. Chapter 374, Interlude 3. Samael blinked. Excuse me. There is only one thing I hate more than narrators who drag things out, the Lord of Stories spat, and it's an unreliable narrator. The golden-haired man knitted his brows. Wait, unreliable. Yes. The boy jabbed a finger at him. Ye talk about fond memories and happy moments, but the pages tell a different tale. Ye are altering the essence of the story. I asked for autobiography, and giving me nostalgia. Samael took yet another slow sip of scotch before replying. That's because it is nostalgia. The Lord of Stories grunted. You are completely impossible. Thank you, Samael said unsurely. The boy god made a gesture like he wanted to strangle something. I am serious. Ye gloss over the important parts. Ye smooth the edges. And ye wrap tragedy in jokes and sentiment. Samael rolled the glass between his palms, the faint clink of ice the only sound for a moment. Sure, maybe, the child repeated, incredulous. Yes, maybe, but tell me this one thing, why do you want to listen to someone's retelling of their story when you already know them all yourself? Quote. Why? The boy's voice carried a hint of curiosity beneath the irritation. Well, because hearing a story from the perspective of the character who lived it, it's more interesting. Samael nodded. Understandable. And when someone recalls their life, do they recall it like a ledger of suffering? The Lord of Stories said nothing. The mortal man continued in that window of silence, leaning back and resting a hand on his knee. They don't, because that's not how it works. When people look back on their past, they don't tally their tragedies. They remember the people who stood beside them. The god scoffed loudly. Very touchin', but if ye can't work around author bias while narratin' a tale, then not a narrator. A liar. And I don't like liars. Samael nearly chuckled upon hearing that. You hate liars. Do you realize you're literally the first liar? You're known as the boy who told the first lie. The Lord of Stories huffed, the sound almost like steam escaping a kettle. Lion to create a story and lion about a story are two completely different things, Samael Theosbane. Okay, hey, that's going too far. The golden-haired man scowled. I never lied about the story. I've recounted the events as honestly as possible. Sure, I may have exaggerated some things, maybe painted myself in a better light than I deserve, but I never changed what actually happened. The boy kept looking Samael dead in the eye. When he spoke again, his voice lost all its childish playfulness. Didn't ye? Okay, then how would ye explain this? Immediately, the scenery around them shifted. Gone was the endless hall of parchment and ink. Samael now found himself standing next to the boy god, with his mismatched socks and crown of quills, inside a room that felt both familiar and alien. Do ye remember this? The Lord of Stories asked. But Samael didn't answer, because his chest tightened at the sight before him, even though he tried his best not to let it show on his face. The two of them were inside a modest yet well-kept home. Samael let himself absorb the lost warmth of the space, letting the memories settle unbidden. The Lord of Stories floated a few inches above the floor, as if his divine feet were too pristine to step down onto the dirty mortal plane even in memory. Remember this? He asked. This was home in last life. The boy god began walking and Samael followed, keeping himself completely calm as they entered a sunlit living room. There, at the edge of a sofa was a little boy with his fists clenched and face flushed red with anger. He looked young, around 7 to 8 years old. And Samael recognized him instantly. That young boy was Noah. That was him in his last life. Noah's father was there too. Disheveled and reeking of cheap alcohol, he had just scolded his son for hitting the neighbor's kid in the leg with a baseball bat. Little Noah was throwing a tantrum. He had a habit of doing that whenever things didn't go his way. Even at such a young age, he'd lash out, get into unprovoked fights, and just start scratching and bruising anyone who got too close to him like a feral animal. The doctors had diagnosed him with oppositional defiant disorder and intermittent explosive disorder, basically a combination of mental and behavioral conditions that made him volatile with sudden episodes of impulsive, aggressive, and violent behavior. His outbursts were typically grossly out of proportion to the situation and occurred with little to no warning. The Lord of Stories floated closer, letting Samael watch without interference. See this. Look into that boy's eyes. Does he look like someone who ever waited quietly for life's misfortunes? No, that is the boy who struck first and hurt those closest to him without thought. That temper, that cruelty, it started young. Learned from the man who should have taught him better. Samael's jaw tightened. I don't need a reminder of all this. I've already accepted it. Accepted, the god murmured wistfully. Ye call this acceptance. Ye left scars and refused to acknowledge them. Instead, ye painted yourself as some tragic boy who was bullied by the system. If ye had accepted it, ye wouldn't have lied about it. The scene shifted again, faster this time. Years passed and Noah had grown up a lot now. He was in college. His long black hair fell in ungroomed bangs over his forehead, and though he was thin and lanky, he was still quick to pick fights. He still had that perpetual scowl on his face and carried that same simmering anger that had never left him. That day, dressed in ripped jeans and a baggy black shirt, he was walking through the campus when he spotted a young man harassing a girl. Noah knew that guy. He was in his class. His name was Brad, but that wasn't why he knew him. He knew Brad because Brad was the type of douchebag who liked to show off his daddy's money and came to college in an expensive BMW, strutting around like the big shot everyone knew he was. And Noah had always been jealous of him. So using the excuse of helping the girl Brad was blatantly harassing, Noah approached them and then punched the young man square in the face. Not once, but again and again, catching him off guard. He didn't stop pummeling when Brad cursed him, and he still didn't stop when the poor boy started crying. Noah just kept hitting until the young man's face was red and swollen and bloody. Later, it turned out that Brad was actually a politician's son. Noah was arrested and locked up for months. Eventually, he was expelled from his college. Samael's hand tightened around the glass he hadn't even realized he was still holding in this vision. He began, but the words stuck in his throat. Don't even try to make an excuse, the Lord of Stories said flatly. As if on that cue, the world shifted once more, this time collapsing into a cramped and unkempt apartment. The air was pungent here with the nose-wrinkling stench of food that had clearly begun spoiling and sheets that hadn't been washed in ages. Noah was sitting on a chair with a single TV screen dead in front of him. The TV wasn't even switched on, but there was a game controller clutched tightly in his hands. On one of the two beds behind him, his father lay coughing and vomiting on a stained mattress. His frame was skeletal and sickly, nothing but bones and skin. His voice rasped, "Water, and Noah, please." Yet Noah did not move. His glazed eyes stayed fixed on the empty TV screen. His hands clenched the controller so firmly that his knuckles had turned white. His father's gasps grew weaker and pleas more desperate. And by his last breath, he could only manage a whisper, I am sorry for not being a good father, and Noah. Noah's grip on the gaming controller still did not falter, even as his father's heartbeat stopped. A few tears fell down his cheeks, but the rest of his body stayed anchored. The TV remained dark and the apartment kept reeking. And Noah continued sitting there motionless. What were ye even doing? The Lord of Stories asked. Ye hadn't fed him for 4 days. Ye didn't move when he asked for water. Did ye really want him dead? Was he really such a burden on ye? Samael averted his gaze. The scene changed again. This time, the setting was a downtown restaurant with polished interiors and a bustling crowd. Noah, now in his early 20s, was moving between customers with a serving tray in hand. Internally, he was both bored by and jealous of the rich bastards who could afford casual fine dining in a place so expensive. It was then that he saw a woman who closely resembled his mother. And upon a clearer look, it indeed was her. She seemed radiant and poised, surrounded by her new husband and a young daughter from her previous marriage, Noah's little sister. Noah tried to slip past and vanish into the crowd, but they saw him. Concern immediately etched into his mother's face. She caught him and bombarded him with questions. Where had he been? What had happened after she paid his bail? Where was he living now, and why hadn't he informed her? Had he been attending the therapy sessions the court mandated? Why couldn't she reach him on his phone? Why had he simply vanished? All the questions were already so annoying. But then she said something that numbed Noah. She said that he should take the money from her that he had been refusing all this time. In hindsight, he understood what she had meant. He had been a problematic child all his life. So when his mother remarried, she couldn't take him with her to her new home the way she had taken his sister. Over time, she tried sending him money but he flat out refused. He cut her off and pushed her away, only contacting her when he had no one to bail him out. But in that moment, hearing her say that sounded like she was flaunting her money, like she was laughing at him after abandoning him all those years ago, like seeing him in a waiter's getup was now below her standards. It just snapped something inside him. His hand moved before his mind could stop it and he struck her across the face with a sharp slap. Her new husband immediately grabbed Noah by the collar and shoved him back in disbelief and fury. Meanwhile, his mother just stood frozen with a cocktail of shock and sadness and anger brewing in her tearful wide eyes. She denounced him then, saying he was no better than his abusive asshole father. She called him embarrassing. Then she turned and left. Though she refused to press charges, the damage was done.